Life was supposed to be straightforward for me. My name is Jason, and I thought I had it all figured out. A stable job, a loving wife named Emily, and two great kids, Sarah and Mike. Emily and I had been married for 15 years, and our relationship seemed rock solid. We were the couple our friends envied. But looking back now, I see that I missed the signs, the subtle shifts in her behavior that hinted at something much darker beneath the surface. Emily had always been a bit high-strung, but in the last few months, her moods had become unpredictable, swinging wildly from affectionate to cold in the span of a day. She'd get hysterical over the smallest things, accusing me of not caring about her feelings or not doing enough around the house, even though I did my best to keep things balanced. Her outbursts were exhausting, but I chalked it up to stress from her job as a marketing executive. Then there were the lies, small ones at first, about who she was meeting for lunch or why she was late coming home from work. "Just a quick drink with the girls," she'd say. Or, "I had to stay late to finish a project." But her explanations never quite added up. The phone calls she'd take in another room, the secretive texts, the way she'd close her laptop whenever I walked into the room, all of it started to gnaw at me. One evening, after a particularly nasty argument, I decided to look through her phone. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I scrolled through her messages, I didn't find anything incriminating, just a lot of mundane conversations with her friends and coworkers. It made me feel foolish and paranoid. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I found the underwear. Emily had always been practical about her lingerie, preferring comfort over style, especially after we had kids. Yet buried at the back of her drawer was a set of lace underwear I had never seen before. It was sexy, the kind of thing she used to wear when we first got together, but hadn't in years. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying she bought it on a whim, but didn't feel comfortable wearing it. That night, lying awake in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. Emily was keeping something from me, and I had to find out what it was. Little did I know, the truth was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The unease grew within me, gnawing at my thoughts and poisoning my every moment. Emily's erratic behavior, the hidden lingerie, the secretive texts. Each piece of the puzzle hinted at something sinister. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Determined to uncover the truth, I resolved to follow her the next time she claimed to be working late. It didn't take long. Just a week after I found the lingerie, Emily announced she had to attend a late meeting at the office. Her tone was casual, but I noticed the way her eyes darted away from mine, the slight tremor in her voice. I nodded, pretending to accept her excuse. But inside, I was seething. That evening, after she left, I quickly arranged for a neighbor to watch the kids and took off in my car. I parked a block away from her office, waiting. As the minutes ticked by, my heart pounded in my chest. Then I saw her. Emily emerged from the building, laughing, her arm linked with my older brother Tom. Tom had always been the golden boy, handsome, successful, the family favorite. But as I watched them together, something dark and furious surged within me. They walked down the street, completely oblivious to my presence, and entered a small, upscale hotel. My vision blurred with rage. I waited for them to check in before I followed, my steps heavy with purpose. The receptionist barely looked up as I strode past, following the sound of their laughter echoing down the hall. I found the door slightly ajar, and through the crack, I saw them. Emily was draped over Tom, her fingers trailing down his chest as they kissed passionately. I pushed the door open with a force that slammed it against the wall. They sprang apart, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. "Jason!" Emily screamed, scrambling to cover herself. Tom's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. "You lying bitch!" I snarled, my eyes locked on Emily before turning to Tom. "And you, my own brother? How long has this been going on?" Tom tried to step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Jason, let me explain." But I didn't let him finish. The rage that had been building inside me erupted. I swung at him, my fist connecting with his jaw with a sickening thud. Tom staggered back, crashing into a table. Emily screamed, but I barely heard her. All I could see was Tom, the betrayer, my own flesh and blood. I lunged at him again, driving my fist into his stomach, then his face. He tried to defend himself, but I was relentless. Each punch was a release of all the anger, the hurt, the betrayal. Blood spattered the walls, mingling with Emily's cries for me to stop. Finally, Tom lay on the floor, barely conscious, his face a bloody mess. I turned to Emily, who was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a sheet around her. "How could you?" I shouted, my voice raw. "How could you do this to our family?" She didn't answer, just continued to cry, her face twisted in anguish. The sight of her, so pathetic and small, only fueled my rage. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of them both, capturing the scene of their betrayal. "I hope it was worth it," I spat, turning on my heel and leaving the room. As I walked away, my knuckles throbbing and my heart pounding, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. I had exposed them, made them pay for their deceit. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a hollow emptiness settled in. The life I had known was shattered, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. When I returned home, the house was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. My neighbor handed me the kids, giving me a concerned look, but I just thanked her and shut the door. I had to keep it together for Sarah and Mike. They didn't deserve to be dragged into this nightmare. The next morning, I woke up early, the events of the previous night playing on a loop in my mind. Emily hadn't come home. I wasn't surprised. She was probably with Tom, nursing his wounds and trying to figure out their next move. I didn't care. They could plot and plan all they wanted, but they couldn't escape the truth. Around mid-morning, the front door creaked open, and Emily stepped inside. Her face was puffy from crying, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted. She looked at me, and for a moment there was a flicker of the woman I had once loved, but that moment passed quickly. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, motioning for her to sit at the kitchen table. I took a seat across from her, folding my arms. "Start talking," I said, my voice cold. Emily took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "Jason, I don't know where to start. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "How long?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "About 6 months." "6 months?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You've been screwing my brother for 6 months? In our home? In our bed?" Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. "It wasn't like that," she sobbed. "It started when you were working late all the time. I was lonely, and Tom, he was there. He listened to me." "Listened?" I scoffed. "Is that what you call it? Listening?" "It wasn't just about sex," she pleaded. "I was unhappy, Jason. We were unhappy. You were always so busy with work, and I felt like you didn't care about me anymore." I slammed my fist on the table, making her jump. "And you think fucking my brother was the solution? You think betraying our family was the way to fix things?" Emily flinched, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you, but I didn't know what else to do." "You could have talked to me," I said, my voice breaking. "You could have told me how you felt instead of sneaking around behind my back." "I tried," she whispered, "but you never listened." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between us. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Had I really been so blind? Had I ignored her cries for help? But then I remembered the images of them together, the betrayal, and my resolve hardened. "This marriage is over," I said, my voice cold and final. "I want a divorce." Emily's eyes widened in panic. "Jason, please, don't do this. We can work it out. I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. "It's too late," I interrupted. "You destroyed any chance we had the moment you chose to betray me with my own brother." She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Jason, think about the kids. Think about our family." "I'm thinking about the kids," I said, standing up. "They deserve better than this. They deserve better than you." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emily sobbing at the table. As I headed upstairs, I heard her phone ring. I knew it was Tom. I didn't care. They could have each other. I was done with both of them. When I reached my bedroom, I started packing a bag. I couldn't stay in this house, not with her. I needed space, time to think. As I packed, my mind raced with questions. How had it come to this? What had I done to deserve such betrayal? But one thing was clear. I was going to fight for my kids. Emily and Tom could have each other, but they wouldn't take Sarah and Mike from me. I would make sure of that. I grabbed my bag and headed downstairs. Emily was still at the table, her face buried in her hands. I walked past her without a word, out the door and into my car. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I was leaving behind a life I had built, a life I thought was solid. But I knew I couldn't stay, not after what she had done. It was time to start over, to rebuild my life from the ground up, without Emily, without Tom, for myself and for my kids. The days that followed were a blur of anger, pain, and planning. I stayed at a hotel, far enough from the house that I didn't have to risk running into Emily or Tom. I needed to distance myself from the betrayal, to gather my thoughts and figure out my next move. Every time I thought about Emily's face, her lies, and the way she and Tom had laughed together, my blood boiled. They had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I couldn't let them get away with it. I had to do something that would show them I wasn't going to be a passive victim in their sordid game. That's when the idea of retaliation started to form. It wasn't enough to just walk away and let them live their lives without consequence. I needed to make sure they felt the weight of their actions, to make them pay for the pain they caused. First, I gathered all the evidence I had. Photos, text messages, everything. I compiled it into a neat folder and made several copies. One went to my lawyer, who assured me that this would strengthen my case for custody and the divorce settlement. The others were for a more personal touch. The next step was more direct. I called Tom. He answered after a few rings, his voice wary. "Jason, you and I need to talk," I said, my voice steady. "Meet me at the old warehouse on Elm Street. Be there in an hour." "Jason, listen," he started, but I cut him off. "1 hour, Tom. Don't be late." I hung up, not giving him a chance to refuse. I arrived at the warehouse early, the old building looming in the dusk. This place held memories of our childhood, of simpler times when Tom and I were inseparable. Now it would be the setting for something far darker. Tom showed up right on time, his face pale and drawn. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Jason, I didn't let him finish. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the wall. "You're going to listen to me," I snarled. "You've betrayed me, and you're going to pay for it." "Jason, please," he pleaded, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "You never meant for this to happen?" I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think that makes it better? You think an apology can erase what you've done?" I punched him hard in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping for breath, but I wasn't done. I grabbed his hair, pulling his head up so he had to look at me. "You've taken everything from me. My wife, my family, my trust. And now I'm going to make sure you regret it." The beating that followed was brutal. Each punch, each kick was a release of the anger and betrayal that had been festering inside me. Tom tried to fight back, but he was no match for my fury. By the time I was done, he was lying on the ground, barely conscious, his face a bloody mess. I stood over him, breathing heavily. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice cold. "You're going to live with this, and you're going to remember every single day what you did to me, and you'll never come near my family again. Do you understand?" He nodded weakly, his eyes filled with pain and fear. Satisfied, I turned and walked away, leaving him to deal with the aftermath of his actions. But I wasn't done yet. There was still Emily to deal with. When I returned to the hotel, I made another call. This time, it was to Emily's boss. I had known him for years and we had always gotten along well. "Bill, it's Jason. I need to talk to you about something important." "Jason, what's going on?" he asked, concern in his voice. "It's about Emily," I said. "I have something you need to see." We arranged to meet the next day. I handed him one of the copies of the evidence, explaining everything that had happened. Bill's face grew darker with each passing minute. "I'm sorry, Jason," he said when I finished. "I had no idea." "Neither did I replied. "But now you do, and I trust you'll know what to do with this information." Bill nodded, understanding. Emily's career was about to take a significant hit. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the deception, the lies, the betrayal of trust, and I knew Bill wouldn't take that lightly. Finally, I sent the last copy of the evidence to our friends and family. Anonymously, of course. I wanted them to see the truth, to understand what kind of people Emily and Tom really were. I wanted their betrayal to be public, for them to feel the shame and judgment of those they had deceived. With the evidence distributed and Tom dealt with, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I had retaliated, made them pay for what they had done. But as the adrenaline faded, the reality of my actions set in. I had crossed a line, let my anger take control. And now, I had to deal with the emotional fallout of not just their betrayal, but my own actions as well. It was a hollow victory, and the path ahead was still uncertain. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I would fight for my kids, for my future, and I would come out stronger on the other side. The 3 days that followed my revenge were a tumultuous blur of emotions, a roller coaster that left me feeling more drained and broken than ever before. The satisfaction of my retaliation quickly gave way to a deep, gnawing sense of emptiness. On the first day, I woke up in the hotel room, the events of the previous night playing like a nightmare in my mind. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving me with nothing but the stark reality of my actions. My knuckles were bruised and swollen, a painful reminder of the beating I had given Tom. Every time I moved, a sharp ache shot through my hand, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, but it was impossible to focus. Every email, every call felt like a meaningless distraction from the churning emotions inside me. I kept thinking about my kids, Sarah and Mike, and how they would be affected by all of this. They were my priority, the reason I had to keep pushing forward. I spent the evening sitting in the hotel room, staring at the walls, replaying everything in my mind. The betrayal, the confrontation, the revenge. It all felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. The anger that had driven me was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. On the second day, the weight of my actions began to settle in. I received a call from Bill, Emily's boss. "Jason, I thought you should know, I've taken action. Emily is on indefinite leave while we investigate." "Thanks, Bill," I said, my voice flat. "I appreciate it." As I hung up the phone, I felt a pang of guilt. Emily's career was in tatters, and while part of me felt she deserved it, another part questioned if I had gone too far. The guilt mingled with the anger and betrayal, creating a toxic mix of emotions that I struggled to process. I decided to visit a therapist. I needed to talk to someone, to try and make sense of everything that had happened. The therapist, Dr. Myers, was a calm and empathetic woman who listened without judgment. I poured out everything, the affair, the confrontation, the revenge. She listened, nodding, occasionally asking questions to prompt me to delve deeper. "You've been through a tremendous amount of emotional trauma," she said gently. "It's natural to feel overwhelmed. The important thing is to focus on healing and moving forward, for yourself and for your children." Her words were a small comfort, but they didn't erase the turmoil inside me. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning as my mind raced with thoughts of what I had done and what lay ahead. By the third day, exhaustion had set in. I felt like I was moving through a fog, each step heavy and deliberate. I knew I needed to see my kids, to be there for them, but I was afraid of facing Emily, afraid of the confrontation, afraid of the emotions that would inevitably bubble to the surface. I decided to visit my mom. She'd always been a pillar of strength for me, and I needed her support now more than ever. When I arrived, she took one look at me and pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, Jason," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I broke down, the weight of the past few days crashing down on me. I sobbed into her shoulder, letting out all the pain, anger, and sadness that had been building up inside me. She held me, her hand gently rubbing my back, offering the comfort only a mother could provide. We sat down, and I told her everything. She listened, her face a mix of sadness and anger. "You did what you had to do," she said firmly. "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for standing up for yourself." "But the kids," I said, my voice breaking. "How do I protect them from all of this?" "We'll get through this together," she assured me. "You're not alone, Jason. We'll figure it out, one step at a time." Her words gave me a small measure of comfort, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I wasn't alone. I had my mom, my kids, and the determination to rebuild my life from the ruins of betrayal. That evening, I finally mustered the courage to call Emily. She answered on the first ring, her voice shaky. "Jason? We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About the kids. About everything." "Okay," she whispered. "When?" "Tomorrow," I replied. "At the house. I'll pick up the kids from school, and we'll talk." The next day, as I stood outside the school waiting for Sarah and Mike, I felt a sense of dread. How could I explain all of this to them? How could I make them understand that their world was changing, that their parents were no longer together? When they saw me, their faces lit up with smiles, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. I hugged them tightly, holding on to that moment of innocence before the storm that was about to break. As we drove home, Sarah chatted about her day, while Mike sat quietly, sensing the tension. When we arrived at the house, Emily was waiting, her face pale and drawn. The kids ran inside, leaving us standing in the driveway, the silence heavy between us. "Jason, I'm sorry," she began, but I held up my hand. "Not now," I said. "We need to focus on the kids. We'll talk later." We went inside, and I gathered Sarah and Mike in the living room. Emily sat down, her eyes red from crying. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Your mom and I have something to tell you," I began, my voice trembling. "We're not going to be living together anymore." Sarah's face crumpled, and tears welled up in Mike's eyes. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "Why can't we all stay together?" "It's complicated," Emily said softly. "But we both love you very much, and that will never change." "But why?" Mike repeated, his voice small and hurt. I struggled to find the right words, my heart breaking for my children. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems they can't fix," I said gently. "But we both love you, and we'll always be here for you, no matter what." The next few hours were a blur of tears and hugs, trying to reassure Sarah and Mike that everything would be okay. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do, but it was necessary. They needed to know the truth, even if it was painful. As the evening wore on, Emily and I sat down at the kitchen table, the weight of the past few days hanging heavily between us. "I don't know how we move forward from this," I said, my voice tired. "We'll figure it out," Emily replied, her voice just as weary. "For the kids' sake, we have to." We discussed the practicalities, custody arrangements, how we would communicate, the logistics of co-parenting. It was a difficult conversation, filled with tension and raw emotions, but it was necessary. We both knew that despite everything, we had to find a way to work together for our children. As I left the house that night, I felt a strange sense of calm. The road ahead would be long and painful, but I was taking the first steps toward healing. I had confronted the betrayal, sought my revenge, and now it was time to rebuild, for myself, for Sarah and Mike, and for the future that lay ahead. The days that followed our confrontation were filled with difficult but necessary decisions. Emily and I worked out a temporary custody arrangement. I would have the kids during the week, and she would take them on weekends. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. Our priority was to provide as much stability for Sarah and Mike as possible. I returned to my hotel room, the silence amplifying my thoughts. Each decision felt like a step away from the life I had known, and a step toward an uncertain future. The pain of betrayal was still fresh, but the need to move forward was stronger. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. We discussed the details of the divorce, the division of assets, and the custody arrangement. "Jason, you have a strong case," she assured me. "With the evidence you've provided, we can secure a favorable outcome for you and the kids." "Thank you, Laura," I said, feeling a sense of relief. "I just want this to be over so I can start rebuilding my life." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into preparing for the divorce proceedings. I documented everything, from Emily's infidelity to her erratic behavior. It was a painful process, but it was necessary. Each piece of evidence was a step closer to closing this chapter of my life. During this time, I also started therapy with Dr. Myers. Our sessions were intense, but they helped me process the anger and sadness I felt. "You need to forgive yourself, Jason," she said during one session. "You're not responsible for Emily's actions. Focus on your healing and your children." Her words resonated with me. I had been so consumed with anger and revenge that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I started to prioritize self-care, going for runs, spending time with friends, and reconnecting with my passions. It was a slow process, but I began to feel more like myself. Emily and I maintained a civil relationship for the sake of the kids. We communicated primarily through text and email, keeping our interactions brief and focused on logistics. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I needed to distance myself from her to heal. One evening, after dropping the kids off at Emily's, I sat in my car, reflecting on the journey so far. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. I had made progress, both emotionally and in rebuilding my life. It was time to make a final decision. The next day, I called Laura. "I'm ready to finalize the divorce," I said, my voice steady. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Once we proceed, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," I replied. "It's time to move on." The divorce proceedings were a whirlwind of paperwork and court dates. Emily fought hard, but the evidence was undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody of Sarah and Mike and a fair division of assets. As I walked out of the courtroom, a sense of relief washed over me. It was over. The months that followed the finalization of the divorce were a period of rebuilding and self-discovery. With the legal battles behind me, I focused on creating a stable and loving environment for Sarah and Mike. We settled into a new routine, one that brought us closer as a family. I found a new home, a cozy house with a big backyard where the kids could play. It wasn't as grand as the one I had shared with Emily, but it was ours. We decorated it together, making it a space filled with warmth and laughter. The kids adjusted surprisingly well, their resilience inspiring me every day. I continued therapy with Dr. Myers, working through the lingering emotions of betrayal and loss. "You've come a long way, Jason," she said one day. "You're not just surviving, you're thriving." Her words felt true. I had found a new sense of purpose, focusing on my career and my children. Work became a place of solace, a distraction from the emotional turmoil. I also reconnected with old friends, rebuilding my social circle and finding joy in the little things. One afternoon, while at a local park with the kids, I ran into an old college friend, Lisa. We hadn't seen each other in years, and it was a pleasant surprise. We chatted, catching up on each other's lives, and exchanged numbers. It felt good to reconnect, to see a familiar face from a happier time. Lisa and I started meeting for coffee, our conversations easy and comforting. She knew about the divorce and was supportive without prying. Our friendship grew, and I found myself looking forward to our chats. She was a reminder that there were still good people in the world, that not everyone would betray me. As the seasons changed, so did my perspective on life. The anger and sadness began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. I started dating again, taking things slow, focusing on finding someone who shared my values and priorities. It wasn't easy, but it was a step toward rebuilding my future. One evening, as the kids and I sat around the dinner table, Sarah looked at me and said, "Dad, you seem happier now." Her words touched me deeply. "I am, sweetheart," I replied. "And it's because of you and Mike. You two are my everything." We continued to create new memories, finding joy in simple moments. Whether it was a game night, a hike in the nearby woods, or just watching a movie together, each day was a step forward. We were healing, growing, and finding our way as a new kind of family. Emily remained a part of the kids' lives, and we maintained a civil relationship. She had started therapy herself and was working on her own issues. While I couldn't forgive her for the betrayal, I could find a way to coexist for the sake of our children. They deserved parents who could put their needs first, even if we couldn't be together. As I reflected on the journey from betrayal to healing, I realized how much I had grown. I had faced unimaginable pain, but I had come out stronger on the other side. The experience had taught me the importance of self-care, of setting boundaries, and of finding strength in the people who truly mattered. One afternoon, while sitting in the backyard watching Sarah and Mike play, I felt a sense of peace. The past was a painful chapter, but it didn't define me. I had a future to look forward to, one filled with possibilities and hope. Lisa joined us that evening for dinner, her presence a comforting reminder of the new connections I was building. As we laughed and shared stories, I realized that life had a way of surprising you. From the depths of betrayal, I had found new friendships, new purpose, and a new sense of self. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. With my kids by my side and the support of friends and family, I knew that I could overcome anything. The betrayal had been a harsh lesson, but it had also been a catalyst for growth and transformation. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over our little home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to embrace the calm. The future was ours to create, and I was ready to make it a bright and beautiful one.